The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everybody. It's awfully nice to be sitting across the table from you once again.
I know, I was thinking this is about the only time that we really do get any relaxation. Like not worrying about anything else. We just sit down, record our episodes. It's nice. I love the studio.
I know, we get to look at each other adoringly.
Yep, that we do.
But it's true, during the week we don't see each other very much because we're both so busy.
Yeah.
So this is our time to just kind of hang out together.
And on Saturday you have the Historical Association where you go volunteer your time doing research.
Yes.
Which really helps with some of the show.
It does. I get all kinds of cool ideas.
I know. And we've noticed that we have some new listeners out there. So for you new listeners that aren't familiar with us, each week Beth and I delve into stories that piqued our curiosity. Usually we do 2 stories an episode. Sometimes when they're long enough, we just do 1.
But it's always something that makes us go, huh.
Yeah, something we find fascinating, and we hope you do too. And speaking of fascinating, we spent the majority of Saturday looking through through my family tree.
Yes, we did, which is probably only fascinating to us, but it was definitely cool to be able to trace your family all the way back to the 1500s.
I know. I can't believe that we were able to go back that far, that somebody had actually done the research. We added some things, but there were some pretty cool things in there for sure.
I highly recommend it. You guys out there, if you haven't done it, just, hop online. There's a bunch of free family tree websites that you can put your information into and see what happens.
Yeah, I chewed up a whole day just tracing it back, looking at all the different names. It was unbelievable.
I know.
The hours just went by.
I know.
But with that said, while I was researching my family this weekend, what did you come across, Beth?
Well, actually, putting together my part of tonight's episode was probably the most fun that I've had putting together an episode in a while, because my mind literally bounced from one idea to the next as I tried to connect all of the points that I wanted to make. And basically, you all are going to kind of have an insight into how I think and how the name of our show really does fit our personalities. So tonight, I'm going to ask everyone to stick with me, because although it might seem like I'm dragging you all over the realm of science fiction while making a pit stop in the paranormal, I promise it will all come together in the end. At least, I hope it does. So, it all started while you and I were watching the George Knapp documentary on Netflix called Investigation Alien. So, for those of you who may not know who George Knapp is, he's a journalist who's been at the forefront of demanding government transparency about UFOs for the last 4 decades. He was the first to interview whistleblower Bob Lazar And he also investigated Skinwalker Ranch long before it was bought by Brandon Fugel. Knapp is an award-winning writer who has also hosted one of our favorite radio shows, Coast to Coast AM. Okay, so his latest documentary is broken into 6 or 8 episodes, and in the very last one, he interviewed a biological anthropologist named Michael Masters. Masters has written extensively about his UFO theory, which is why Knapp was interviewing him. And although it has been met with both major support and major skepticism, it really got me thinking. So here's his theory. There is no such thing as aliens from outer space. UFOs, however, are very real and do exist and are being covered up by our government. Now, at first, that doesn't really make any sense. How can you believe in one and not the other? Because Masters proposes that all UFOs are piloted by humans. Always have been, always will be. Well, I'm sure you're all thinking, well, that's dumb. If people are seeing UFOs or UAPs or whatever you want to call them, doing things that no one on Earth has the technology or capability to do, and they're not reverse engineered from alien technology, how can they possibly be piloted by humans? How can we pilot something we don't even have the technology to create or the expertise to understand? Because, according to Masters, they are piloted by humans from the future. So, this idea actually isn't new. Science fiction writers have used this storyline before, since the 1940s. The spaceships buzzing around a world on the brink of some major decision, trying desperately to warn mankind about the consequences of their actions, aren't some kind of benevolent alien race. They are actually humans sent back from the future to save mankind from destroying ourselves. But Masters, who's a professor of biological anthropology at Montana's Technical Institute, has a rather compelling argument that it might very well be the truth. According to Space.com, Masters looks at the UFO and alien phenomenon through an anthropologist's lens and points out that in most alien encounter stories, the aliens are described as bipedal, hairless, human-like entities with large brain cavities, large eyes, small noses, and small mouths. They are often described as communicating with us telepathically while using our own language. How do aliens from distant planets know our language? He also points out that most UFOs, although far advanced from our current technology, still exhibit technology that's built on concepts already imagined by humans. So while we were watching the show and then I was reading this article, it made me instantly think of science fiction writers like Arthur C. Clarke. To say Clarke was brilliant is an understatement. Initially interested in dinosaurs as a child, he quickly turned his attention to space, becoming a member of the Junior Astronomical Society as a teen. He wrote to Marion Eddy, the Society Journal's editor, and suggested an aeronautics column, which Clarke was soon writing articles for about spacecraft and space travel. And we're talking early 1930s. During World War II, he joined the Royal Air Force as a radar specialist and was involved in the early warning radar defense system and the ground-controlled approach radar, which was instrumental in later conflicts. He was both a pilot and a flight instructor. After the war, he got a college degree in both mathematics and physics from King's College and held down a job as the assistant editor of Physics Abstracts. He was president of the British Interplanetary Society for 4 years. Although he didn't invent geostationary satellites, he did write several papers insisting that they could be used as telecommunication relays. In 1945, he wrote about a satellite that would remain stationary above the Earth, allowing for radio and TV signals to be relayed. NASA's Echo satellite was launched in 1960. He wrote numerous papers and books about rockets, space exploration, and orbits. Apparently, when President John F. Kennedy doubted that we could go to the moon, NASA scientist Wernher von Braun convinced him by showing him Clark's 1951 book, Exploration of Space. Despite his impressive background in both science and math, Clark was also a science fiction writer, and a damn good one. And in all of his writings, both in his serious scientific papers and his science fiction books, he kept proposing technology that actually exists today because he thought of it, especially in biotechnology and computer capabilities. He came up with the idea of a global library. Google, anyone? GPS and video conferencing. He predicted that someday computers would do everything from reserve theater tickets to online banking. And everyone would have one in their house, and it would become as commonplace as the telephone. When he wrote 2001, A Space Odyssey, he created HAL, an artificial intelligence that was capable of speech synthesis, speech recognition, facial recognition, natural language processing, lip reading, art appreciation, interpreting emotional behaviors, automated reasoning, spacecraft piloting, and computer chess. And we all know we currently have most of those things.
Yeah, he was a forward thinker.
Absolutely. And I think it's safe to say that Clark's writing greatly influenced our technological thinkers and shakers. His papers are on display at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., so they certainly took him very seriously. All of those things are just the tip of the iceberg as far as Clark's accomplishments go. I could probably do 2 or 3 whole episodes just about him, but suffice it to say, the man was brilliant. He understood time and space better than a lot of people, and many of his crazy ideas became a reality that you and I use on a daily basis. Some of the technology may have taken humans 50 years to perfect, but we did it. I mean, many of you listening to us right now are probably listening on your smartphones, which he imagined 70 years ago.
I know, it's amazing.
If humans can imagine it, it can become a reality. Interestingly, although Clark did write about time travel in his short story Time's Arrow, he did not believe in time travel. He often argued that if time travel was possible, we'd be seeing evidence of it already. And here's where my brain circled back to Michael Masters, because Masters would suggest that we are seeing evidence of it already and have for thousands of years. Think about the classic gray alien. The big head, the big eyes, the tiny mouth and nose, the short stature, and the long arms. Essentially, they are humanoid. Masters proposes that they are more than that. They're human. According to Space.com, Masters refers to them as extraterrestrials and has shown through computer-generated time lapses how present-day humans, if following our current evolutionary path and taking into account current environmental and biological factors, we really could look like gray aliens one day.
Yeah, and I found that fascinating.
I remember we were sitting there watching it together and you were like, mind blown. In the 2020 metro.co.uk article, UFOs could be time-traveling humans visiting from the future, Professor says, by Jasper Hamill, Masters said, quote, "If we continue to evolve in the same way we have over the 6 to 7 million years since we first started walking upright, and our neurocranium, the upper part of our skull and brains, continue to increase in size and get more rounded. If the same dominant trend continues in the future, we are likely to look very much like what is commonly described in UFO reports." End quote. He also proposes that the UFO capabilities described in witness testimony operate on our current understanding of modern physics. He said, quote, "These craft seem to have the function of bending time and possess characteristics in line with what we know from modern physics with regards to how we would actually bend space-time in order to return to the past." End quote. When asked why UFOs would be piloted by future humans on a time-traveling trip instead of by beings from another planet, Masters points out that we have no evidence that aliens actually exist, but we certainly know that humans do. Does it make more sense that aliens have come from distant galaxies to observe us, or that future humans have traveled back in time to observe us?
Well, what's the chances that they look pretty much like us, like humans?
Pretty darn slim.
Right, because, they could look like anything. What else on our planet looks like us except for apes? Really? They could take on any kind of form. You wouldn't expect a humanoid figure from outer space.
And for them to understand our language. That's the other thing that always, surprises me when people say that they telepathically communicated with them. It's like, how do they know English or French or German or whatever language that person speaks?
Google Translator.
Thank you, Arthur C. Clarke.
Right.
So let's take a look at what UFO encounters tend to be. In many cases, UFOs are seen over military installations and nuclear plants. They're seen over our oceans, sometimes flying into the water itself. It makes sense that future humans would be interested in how we are using those things. And alien encounters, from abductions to cattle mutilations, it does seem just as likely that future humans would perform these invasive procedures as aliens. But why? It makes sense that future humans would have a vested interest in the planet, or that they want to visit the past. Masters makes an interesting point in the Space.com article about tourism. Think about all the places on Earth that are major tourist attractions. They're all historically significant, right? Something like 120 million tourists visit ancient sites annually across the globe. As a species, we are very interested in our own past, and we at least claim to learn from our mistakes and to learn from our ancestors. Is it possible that future humans are traveling back in time to learn about their own history? Except they're doing it while it's still happening. Can you imagine if you're on a time travel vacation and your spaceship crashes? It would be like Marty McFly being stuck in the Wild West with Doc in a busted-up DeLorean. The thing is, Masters has always been adamant that his theory is just a theory. He's not saying that this is the way it is. He's just asking the powers that be to consider it among the realm of possibility. His skeptics are pretty harsh, saying his theory is all well and good except for one major problem. He's assuming that time travel is not only possible, but that humans have figured out how to do it pretty successfully. And if they have, when? Is it possible that some advanced human civilization on Earth already perfected time travel, and then our society collapsed, and the few who survived were able to hide out under the oceans? Is that why so many UFOs are USOs, unidentified submersible objects? The whole thing is mind-boggling and seems rather outlandish. How could we have discovered something so incredible like time travel and then lost that knowledge? Well, how did humans build places like Göbekli Tepe and the Great Pyramids? Because we haven't figured out those mysteries either. So, next, I decided to look at what time travel experiments are being done right now. According to the debrief.org, a research team out of Cambridge University used properties of quantum entanglement to reverse time. Now, to be clear, these experiments are being done in simulation, not with actual stuff. But by simulating the entanglement of two particles, in this case, photons, and beaming them into a cloud of atoms, the photons appeared to exit the cloud before they entered it. One of the photons, when manipulated by the scientists, could actually reprogram the other one to change what it did after it did it. Futurism.com explained the experiment a little more. Photons are massless particles that form visible light and can be absorbed by the atoms they travel through. This is why a chair in your living room will stop a sunbeam coming in through your window. When photons travel through atoms, the atoms become excited or jump to a higher energy state. But the atoms will also de-excite and re-emit the photons. When this happens, it appears to the observer that the light traveling through the atom was delayed. By bringing the atom cloud to a temperature of near zero and passing the photons through, the photons were not absorbed, but the atoms responded as if they had. And when the photons were absorbed by the ultra-cold atoms, they were re-emitted without the expected delay. Now, what that means for us non-quantum physicists is that when the atoms are experiencing an excited state, and if they could be hooked up to a quantum clock, the hands on the clock would tick backwards. The catch is that the experiment only caused the backwards time 25% of the time. The other 75% of the time, it didn't work. But a consistent 25% is nothing to sneeze at. The debrief article used this analogy. Imagine you are ordering a gift for a friend, and in order for it to arrive on time, you have to order it today. So, unsure what to get, you order 4 different things and have them sent to your friend's house. The following day, after the items have shipped, your friend sends you a wish list, and you discover that none of the things you ordered are on the list. The photon experiment proves that you could go back and change one of the items you ordered so that when your 4 gifts show up on your friend's doorstep, one of them would be right. It may seem small, but it's actually pretty amazing because it proves, at least through simulation, that backwards time travel is possible. We just aren't anywhere near the point of being able to do it outside of a simulation, at least not yet. But Arthur C. Clarke envisioned things that sometimes took 50 years to come to a reality. Where will we be in 50 years? But that still doesn't solve the question of how UFOs can be piloted by humans from the future. Well, I guess that depends on how you define time. Is it linear or is it circular? Is it dimensional? To me, that's the even bigger question. When we can understand the true workings of time, all these other things, time travel, UFOs, hauntings, reincarnations, Bigfoot, all of it, I think will make a lot more sense.
It's going to take a while.
Yes, which is the rub with his theory, is that people are saying we have to have already perfected it in order for that to be the case.
Right.
It is mind-boggling, but like I said, I had so much fun just kind of trying to connect all the dots in my little Beth way.
Well, like we always say, you get onto one thing, and then it brings you down the rabbit hole onto something else, and you just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. And sometimes it becomes very confusing. And then other times you're a little bit more enlightened by things.
Well, I kept remembering, too, I think I've mentioned this before on the show. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't. But when I was a kid and we used to take a plane from New York to Tokyo, Japan, and there would be the time change.
Right.
My mother would always say that, we weren't particularly religious, but she'd always say God decided we needed a do-over. And even as a young kid, I always thought time is so weird that you can leave one place at a certain time and arrive in another place and it's half a day earlier or half a day later. Like, how is that possible? Because man constructed time.
Exactly. We'll be back right after this quick break.
Hey, did you know? Sometimes you really can find treasure at a garage sale. In 2016, an antique dealer bought a painting of a fisherman at a garage sale in Minnesota for under $50. Turns out, the painting, titled Elamar, is a long-lost Van Gogh worth an estimated $15 million. Van Gogh painted the fisherman during his one-year stay at St. Remy, the asylum he went to after cutting off his own ear. This is also where he painted Starry Night. Experts announced just this past week that they were able to confirm the painting's authenticity through several ways, one of which was a strand of human hair embedded in the paint. Who'd have thunk it? All right, we're back, and now it's your turn. So, where did your mind wander to?
Well, for all of you out there who probably haven't heard me mention this before, I love old historical homes. I love the architecture. I'm on many Facebook groups. And, there are days where I'll spend an hour or two looking at the outside of these old homes and blowing up the picture and just looking at all the little intricate details and then scrolling through the inside and blowing it all up so I can just see all the details in the woodwork. I mean, it's just incredible. The amount of time, the craftsmanship that goes into these places. And, it makes you wonder how many generations of people have lived there, what they were like, what it was like probably growing up there, running through the halls and the hiding spots. Well, when I saw this place, I knew I had to do a story on it. So, for my story tonight, I'm going to be talking about a mansion. The mansion that sits on the highest hill overlooking downtown Victoria, British Columbia, is the ultimate symbol of wealth and status. Essentially built in the Scottish baronial style, it was meant to look like a Scottish castle, and even has a Scottish name, Craigdarroch. To say it's imposing is an understatement. Picture a massive 4-story, 25,000 square foot stone building with 5 chimneys, a turret, 2 matching arched windows in the front, stone pillars along the front porch, and a red roof, and you have just a tiny idea of its grandeur. Designed by architect Warren H. Williams, the mansion is built out of both British Columbia sandstone and granite, and decorated in wrought iron. Inside, there is stained glass, Italian marble, Vermont slate, terracotta tile from California, and an oak staircase prefabricated in Chicago. Craigdarroch is considered a bonanza castle, a term used to describe opulent and oversized homes built in the late 19th century by very wealthy industrialists. Not bad considering it was built by an indentured coal miner from Scotland. When Robert Dunsmuir was 25 and already had a wife and 2 small children, he volunteered to join his uncle's trip from Scotland to Vancouver Island. His uncle Boyd Gilmore had signed on with the Hudson's Bay Company, and Robert figured that it would be an adventure. As a miner, Robert could make $5 a week, which isn't bad for 1851. Their initial coal mining operation didn't pan out, though, and the Hudson's Bay Company had them moved to Nanaimo, also on Vancouver Island. By 1854, the contract with the Hudson's Bay Company ran out, and Gilmore decided to return to Scotland, but not Robert. He decided to stay behind and see how things would go. After making his way up through the ranks to owning his own mines, Robert was producing 50,000 tons of coal per year by 1875, selling most of his coal to the Royal Navy and markets in San Francisco. Robert's family had come to join him in Nanaimo, soon after he had decided to stay, and he and his wife Joan had 10 children together, 8 girls and 2 boys. They had lived in Nanaimo together up until 1885, when they decided to move to the city of Victoria, in a house called Fairview. By this point in time, Robert was a member of the Legislative Assembly, and his oldest son James, who was just 25 years old, was in charge of the Wellington mining operation in Nanaimo. His youngest son Alexander lived in San Francisco, where he managed Robert's shipping offices. But that's not all. Dunsmuir coal was transported on railways owned by Robert and on ships owned by Robert. And he owned a bunch of other things as well, including a theater, several coal mining operations, a sawmill, a diking company, and a quarry. At the time of his death in 1889, Robert Dunsmuir was the richest man in all of British Columbia, with an empire worth $15 million. That would be $509 million in today's money. So, of course, a man with that kind of wealth and power would want to build a home that reminded him of the castles he grew up around in Scotland. So, in 1887, the construction began. It's estimated that Robert's Bonanza Castle cost $500,000 to build. That's about $16 million in today's money. First, as I had mentioned earlier, it sat on 28 acres, on the highest hill overlooking Victoria, and it had 39 rooms, spread over 25,000 square feet. The lower floors included a library, a drawing room, a formal dining room, and a smoking room. The third floor included a billiards room. The ballroom and access to the tower were on the fourth floor. According to the official castle website, Robert had hoped that the castle would propel his 3 still unmarried daughters into engagements. Unfortunately, though, Robert didn't live to see his castle completed. He died at the age of 63 in 1889. His 2 sons, Alex and James, took over the completion of the house. Joan and her 3 unmarried daughters traveled through Europe until Craigdarroch was finished, and then they moved in. But in his will, Robert Dunsmuir left everything, and I mean absolutely everything, to his wife. Alex and James, who were both in their 30s, had successfully run their father's companies for years, but for whatever reason, he left them absolutely nothing. Understandably, this caused strife within the family, especially since both boys swore their father had made them several verbal promises that the business would someday be theirs. It took 7 years of negotiations for Joan to finally pass the title for the San Francisco Shipping Company to them. Then, another 3 years before she'd allow them to take ownership of the mining operation in Wellington. Alex Dunsmuir had been living with a divorced woman for almost 20 years, and when he finally had rights to part of the family business, he felt financially secure enough to marry her. 6 weeks later, he passed away while they were on their honeymoon.
Oh no. He waits 20 years to marry her and then croaks on the honeymoon.
Yeah, I can only imagine the excitement that probably made him croak on his honeymoon.
Probably.
The reading of his will caused even more issues, pitting Joan and the 3 unmarried sisters against the remaining brother James. The ensuing lawsuits went all the way to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council of London, which was basically Canada's Supreme Court. The lawsuit pretty much meant that James and his mother didn't speak for years. She continued to live in Craigdarroch Castle for another 18 years, and James went on to become the Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia. After Joan's death in 1908, none of her 10 children wanted the castle, and so it was put up for sale and sold to land speculator Griffith Hughes for just $38,000. He subdivided the estate into building lots and then announced that he would be raffling off the house. If people bought parcels of his land, they'd automatically be entered into the raffle. The castle was won by Solomon Cameron, who immediately mortgaged the house in order to pour money into other ventures. Those ventures failed, though, and Cameron found himself broke. So the next owner of Craigdarroch Castle was the Bank of Montreal. By 1919, the castle was renovated and turned into a military hospital, which it was for just 2 years. By 1920, it was purchased by Victoria College. It stayed under the college's ownership until 1946. It then became the home of the Victoria School Board for the next 2 decades, before the Victoria Conservatory of Music moved in 1968. 11 years later, in 1979, it was converted into a museum. The Craigdarroch Castle Historical Museum Society has maintained and cared for the castle ever since, offering tours to the public. Around 150,000 visitors come to the castle every year. Miraculously, despite all the different uses the castle has fulfilled over the decades, there are still furnishings inside that have been there since the day it was built. The stained glass in the castle is so exquisite that the Institute for Stained Glass in Canada has documented examples from the house. According to the castle website, 32 of the 47 original windows are still intact. But the kicker is, no one can figure out who made them. All they have is a receipt from 1890 from A.H. Andrews and Company out of Chicago that includes a price for windows. But it's anyone's guess if that refers to regular glass-paned ones or the intricate and beautiful stained glass ones. So it just says windows. They have no idea.
Right.
Stained glass experts would love to know where at least one of the windows came from. It's a beautifully rendered version of the famous painting The Odalisque by Sir Frederick Leighton. So, with a history like Craigdarroch, from the Dunsmuir family to its days as a military hospital and a college, most people would expect there to be dozens of ghosts there. But to my surprise, and probably others, there aren't dozens. But there are a handful. However, the Museum Society does not publicly acknowledge that the castle is haunted. They don't offer up ghost tours, and they certainly don't advertise that people have encountered the paranormal within its walls. But as a popular wedding spot and film location, people have reported running into apparitions and hearing sounds that they just can't explain. Even the staff have had their own experiences. According to NPIweb.com, castle visitors have claimed to hear whispers in empty rooms. They've commented on the lovely piano music that they can hear coming from the dining room, which they can hear clearly from adjoining rooms. Except there's no one playing a piano in the dining room, because there isn't a piano in the dining room or anywhere else in the castle itself. Sometimes people report the unnerving sound of a baby crying from within the mansion, even when there are no visitors there for the day. Cold spots seem to come out of nowhere, and the overwhelming scent of burning candles fill the air. Joan Dunsmuir, by the way, was fond of that scent and liked to have candles burning all the time. On several occasions, both staff and visitors have encountered the apparition of a young girl down in the basement. She doesn't look at them, though. Instead, she stares at the floor with a concerned look on her face, as though she is feeling troubled by something. As the living try to approach her, she vanishes right before their very eyes. The general consensus is that she is one of Robert's unmarried daughters, who passed away shortly after he did. But by far, the most common experience with the paranormal at Craigdarroch is the lady in white. Like we said before, it's always a lady in white.
Always, especially in castles.
Frequently, a lady in white is seen staring out the castle's windows at all times of the day, who doesn't match the description of anyone employed there. Her full apparition has been spotted from inside the castle as well. She's frequently seen standing at a specific window in the fourth-floor ballroom, dressed in white. At other times, she's been seen walking down the main staircase. Strangely, she's never seen in any other parts of the castle, and when she's spotted on the stairs, she is always walking down the steps, never up the steps. People speculate, of course, that she's Joan Dunsmuir. Perhaps she's looking for any of her 10 children who didn't stay in the mansion that she loved. Or maybe her apparition is a residual haunt, and she's walking a path that represents one specific moment in time that mattered to her in a big way. It is kind of odd, though, that there aren't more ghosts at Craigdarroch. But maybe that's because, as Beth's Canadian aunt put it, Canadians just don't make such a big deal about that stuff.
She did say that, because I was saying to her one time that I was having a hard time finding haunted places in Canada to do stories about. And that was her explanation, that it's because Canadians just don't make that big a deal about that stuff.
That's awesome.
It is awesome.
But here's a strange coincidence for you. James Dunsmuir also built his very own bonanza castle called Hatley Castle, not too far away. And it's also reportedly haunted by the Dunsmuir family members. So maybe Joan and her daughters stay put at Craigdarroch and James stays put at Hatley, just like they did for all those years that they were fighting.
That's kind of sad, though. I mean, we've heard about cases where this is even more sad, where it's estranged family members that are actually in the same house and their spirits can't find each other. But this is, two separate, sprawling mansions.
Well, unfortunately, when it comes to that amount of money and that kind of hurt that you were left out, you can see why people separate.
Right. Especially if they felt that they had been promised.
I don't really think there was much therapy back then to work these family matters out.
No, I don't think there was. But I could see, my wheels are turning, I could see Hatley Castle featuring in a future episode, because it sounds intriguing.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the episode as much as we did putting it together.
This was a fun one, at least for me.
Yeah, and Beth will be posting some pictures of the castle online.
Yes.
It's truly amazing.
It's gorgeous.
It really is. I mean, this one, there are a lot of nice castles out there, or mansions. But to look at this one, it's just amazing.
Yeah, I was making you look at pictures the other night. I was like, come here, look at this smoking room.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's everything that I would want in a mansion. Well, Beth, I think that about wraps it up for this episode.
I think so.
Anything you'd like to add before we sign off for the night?
Well, I have to mention our sources in our show notes. They're important. That's where we did the bulk of our researching. And so if you would like to know more about Craigdarroch Castle or about time travel or Arthur C. Clarke or any of the stuff we've talked about tonight, you can always check our sources in our show notes and do some reading for yourself.
Join us again next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
And thank you all for your continued support.
See you next week for an all-new episode.